The Montana wind cut through the sparse crowd, gathered around the grave like a blade through canvas. Coulter Raines stood 10 feet back from the others, his 15-year-old son, Elias, pressed close to his side. The boy's dark hair whipped across his face as he sketched something in a worn notebook, trying to ignore the ceremony. Coulter watched the pine coffin disappear into the ground with the same detachment he'd felt watching enemy combatants fall in Kandahar. Hal Raines had been a stranger who happened to share his blood. Nothing more. "You should say something," whispered the funeral director, a thin man with nervous hands. "No." Coulter's voice carried the finality of a closing door. Across the grave, a woman with sharp features and expensive clothes dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Devine Raines. Coulter had never seen her before today, but the resemblance to the old man was unmistakable. Same pale eyes, same stubborn jaw. The preacher droned on about eternal rest and God's mercy. Coulter counted the mourners. 12 people total. For a man worth $70 million, Hal Raines had died remarkably alone. "Is that her?" Elias whispered, nodding toward Devine. "Must be." The service ended with a handful of dirt thrown on polished wood. People began to scatter, but Devine approached the lawyer who'd been standing near the headstone. Harold Kessler, according to the business card he'd pressed into Coulter's hand 3 days ago. "Mr. Raines?" Kessler's voice carried over the wind. "Could we speak privately?" Coulter guided Elias toward the black rental car. "Wait here." He walked back to where Kessler stood, shuffling papers. Devine remained close enough to hear every word, her face tight with expectation. "Your father's will is straightforward," Kessler said, adjusting his glasses. "The ranch, the investments, the mineral rights, everything goes to you. 70 million, give or take." The words hit Coulter like a punch to the gut, but his expression never changed. "Everything, every penny." Kessler glanced at Devine, whose tissue had fallen forgotten to the ground. "There are a few small bequests to charity, but the bulk of the estate is yours." Devine stepped forward, her composure cracking. "That's impossible. I'm his daughter too. According to Mr. Raines' will, you were provided for during his lifetime." Kessler's tone remained professional, but Coulter caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "The matter is settled. Provided for." Devine's voice rose to a pitch that made several mourners turn their heads. "He gave me a job managing one of his properties. That's not the same as being his daughter." Coulter studied her face. The anger was real, but something else lurked beneath it. Calculation. Devine wasn't just upset, she was planning. "The estate transfer will take a few weeks to complete," Kessler continued, handing Coulter a thick envelope. "These are the details. I suggest you retain legal counsel." "I'll handle it myself." Kessler nodded and walked away, leaving Coulter alone with Devine. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the fresh grave. "He talked about you sometimes," she said finally. "Said you were tough. Said you survived things that would break other men. Did he now?" "Said you hated him." Coulter looked down at the envelope in his hands. $70 million. Enough to give Elias any future he wanted. Enough to disappear forever if necessary. "Your father was right about that," he said, and walked back to the car. 3 weeks later, Coulter stood in the doorway of what had been Hal's study, watching Elias arrange art supplies on the massive oak desk. They'd driven down from Montana that morning to see the Oregon ranch property. 800 acres of timber and grassland, plus a house that looked like something from a magazine. "This is really ours?" Elias asked, opening a fresh sketchbook. "Looks like it." The boy started drawing the view from the window, rolling hills dotted with cattle, a red barn in the distance. His hand moved with the same steady precision Coulter had once used to field strip an M4 carbine that Coulter's phone buzzed. A text from Maya Torres, his old unit buddy who now worked private security in Portland. "Saw the news story about your inheritance. You okay?" He typed back, "Fine. Thanks for checking. Money changes things. Watch your six." Coulter pocketed the phone and walked to the window. Maya was right. News of the inheritance had appeared in the local paper 2 days ago. Nothing detailed, just a mention that the reclusive millionaire Hal Raines had left his fortune to his estranged son. But in a town of 3,000 people, that was enough. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Coulter? Oh my God, is it really you?" The voice hit him like ice water in his veins. Trista, his ex-wife. The woman who'd walked out on him and Elias 4 years ago, chasing drugs and men who promised her things she'd never get. How did you get this number? I saw the story in the paper. $70 million, Coulter. Can you believe it? He could picture her perfectly blonde hair that probably wasn't natural anymore, blue eyes that had once made him forget how dangerous she could be. Those eyes had lied to him more times than he could count. What do you want, Trista? I want to see my son. I have rights. You signed those away when you left. I was sick then. I'm better now. I've been clean for 6 months. Coulter almost laughed. 6 months. In 4 years, that was probably her longest stretch. The answer is no. You can't keep me from him forever, especially now that you're rich. A judge might think Elias deserves some of that money. My money, too, since we were married when your father died. There it was. The real reason for the call. We were divorced when he died. You get nothing. We'll see about that. The line went dead. Coulter stared at the phone for a moment, then deleted the call from his history. But he couldn't delete the cold, knot forming in his stomach. Dad! Elias looked up from his drawing. Who was that? Nobody important. The next morning, Coulter drove Elias to the local high school to handle the enrollment paperwork. The building was small but clean, with wide hallways and decent lighting. Better than some of the places they'd lived. They were walking back to the truck when Coulter spotted the familiar blonde hair across the parking lot. Trista stood near a blue sedan, smoking a cigarette and watching the school entrance like a predator sizing up prey. Get in the truck, Coulter told Elias. But now, Elias obeyed without argument. He'd learned to read his father's tone. Coulter walked across the parking lot with measured steps. Trista saw him coming and dropped her cigarette, grinding it under the heel of a boot that probably cost more than most people made in a week. Hello, Coulter. She tried to smile, but looked forced. You look good. Military life agreed with you. Stay away from my son. Our son. She stepped closer, and he caught the smell of perfume mixed with something else. Not alcohol. Something synthetic. Pills, maybe. I just want to talk to him. No, you can't stop me. I'm his mother. You're a drug addict who abandoned her child. That's all you are. Trista's fake smile disappeared. Things change. People change. I'm not the same person I was. You're right. You're worse. I know about the money, Coulter. $70 million. That changes everything. Not for you. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. We'll see. I got a lawyer now. A good one. He thinks I have an excellent case for back support. And maybe custody, too. A stable home environment, you know? Not some military man who disappears for months at a time. I'm retired. Are you? Really? Because you look like the same cold bastard who used to come home covered in someone else's blood. Coulter felt something shift inside him, like a door opening in a dark room. The feeling was familiar and dangerous. If you come near Elias again, you'll regret it. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Trista backed toward her car, but her eyes never left his face. You always were dramatic. This isn't over, Coulter. Not by a long shot. She drove away, leaving only the smell of burned rubber and cheap perfume. That evening, Coulter sat in his truck outside a bar called Murphy's, watching Trista through the front window. She was at a corner table with a man he didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with tattoos crawling up both arms. The man's movements had the controlled tension of someone who'd spent time in prison. Coulter took photos with his phone, focusing on a man's face. Later, he'd run the images through some databases Maya had access to. Inside the bar, Trista was talking fast, gesturing with her hands. The man listened without expression, occasionally nodding. When she pulled out her phone and showed him something on the screen, his face changed. A slow smile spread across his features, but it wasn't pleasant. Coulter drove home thinking about Kandahar, about a mission that had gone wrong because someone in his unit had been feeding information to the enemy. About the night he discovered the traitor was his own team leader, a man named Patterson who'd been selling intel for drug money. Patterson had begged when Coulter cornered him in that abandoned building. Offered to split the money. Promised to disappear and never come back. Coulter had listened to every word, then put 2 bullets in Patterson's chest. Not because he was angry, because it was necessary. Some problems couldn't be negotiated with. They could only be eliminated at home. Elias was in the kitchen making sandwiches for dinner. The boy had inherited his mother's delicate features, but his father's steady hands. He worked methodically, cutting the crusts off the bread with surgical precision. "How was school?" Coulter asked. "Good. I met some kids in our class. They're nice. Anyone give you trouble?" "No. Why would they?" Coulter didn't answer. In his experience, trouble always found you eventually. The smart play was to see it coming. "I was thinking we might get you a phone," he said instead. Elias looked up, surprised. "Really? Something simple. For emergencies." "Okay. Thanks, Dad." They ate dinner in comfortable silence. Then Elias went upstairs to work on homework. Coulter cleaned the dishes and checked the locks on all the doors. The house had a decent security system, but he'd learned not to trust electronics completely. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Your boy's name is Cade Fessler. 3 years in Pelican Bay for aggravated assault. Connected to the Mongols, MC. Bad news all around." Coulter deleted the message and walked to the window. The ranch stretched out under a sky full of stars, peaceful and quiet. But peace was fragile. It could be shattered by a single phone call, a knock on the door, a mistaken judgment. He thought about Trista's lawyer, about custody battles and court orders, about the $70 million that had painted a target on his back. Some fights you could avoid. Others came looking for you whether you wanted them or not. This one was coming. Coulter could feel it in the wind. Coulter left for Portland early Tuesday morning to meet with Harold Kessler about transferring some of the estate assets. He wanted to bring Elias, but the boy had a chemistry test he couldn't miss. "I'll be back by dinner," Coulter said, checking the house security system one more time. "I'll be fine, Dad. It's not like anything happens around here." The drive to Portland took 3 hours. Kessler's office was downtown, in a building with too much glass and not enough exits. They spent 2 hours going over paperwork, investment accounts, property deeds, tax implications. Boring but necessary. "Your father was a careful man," Kessler said, sliding another document across his desk. "Everything is documented, organized, legitimate." "Good. There's one thing. Your half-sister has been asking questions. About the will, about whether it can be contested." Coulter looked up from the papers. "Can it? Unlikely. Your father was of sound mind when he wrote it, and there were witnesses. But she seems determined to try. Let her try." On the drive home, Coulter's phone rang twice. Both calls from unknown numbers. He let them go to voicemail. The ranch looked normal when he pulled into the driveway at 6:30. Elias's bike was on the front porch, and lights were on in the kitchen. But something felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. Coulter parked and walked to the front door. It was locked, but the security system wasn't armed. Elias always said it when he got home from school. Inside, the house was silent. No television, no music, no sounds of movement. Coulter called his son's name and got no answer. He found Elias in the upstairs bathroom, unconscious and bleeding from a dozen cuts and bruises. His left eye was swollen shut, and his jaw was clearly broken. Written on the bathroom mirror in red lipstick were the words, "Tell your daddy we want half, or we'll come back." Coulter knelt beside his son and checked for a pulse. Strong and steady. Breathing was normal, but the damage was extensive. Professional. Designed to hurt without killing. He called 911, then sat on the floor holding Elias's hand until the paramedics arrived at the hospital. Doctors confirmed what Coulter already knew. Fractured jaw, broken ribs, concussion. The boy would heal, but it would take time. "Did you see who did this?" asked Deputy Sheriff Lonnie Greer, a thick man with kind eyes and too much faith in human nature. "No," Coulter lied. "Any idea who might want to hurt your family?" "No." Greer frowned. "Mr. Raines, I know about your inheritance. Money like that draws attention. Not all of it good. I understand. If someone's threatening you, we can help. But we need information." Coulter looked through the window of Elias's hospital room. The boy was sedated, his face wrapped in bandages. Machines monitored his heart rate and breathing. "There's nothing to tell," Coulter said. Greer sighed and closed his notebook. "Well, we'll do what we can. Check for fingerprints, interview the neighbors. But between you and me, cases like this are hard to solve without witnesses." After the deputy left, Coulter sat alone in the hospital corridor. He thought about Patterson again, about the moment when talking had stopped being an option. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hope your boy heals up quick. Next time might be worse. You know what we want." Coulter stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. When Elias woke up 3 hours later, his eyes found his father immediately. "Dad, I'm here. They said to tell you something." "I know. Rest now." "I'm sorry." Coulter leaned forward. "This isn't your fault. None of it. What are you going to do?" The question hung in the air between them. Coulter looked at his son's broken face and felt something cold and final settle in his chest. "Whatever I have to." Coulter found the cabin buried in the Montana wilderness 2 hours north of Missoula. No roads led to it, just an old logging trail that required four-wheel drive and patience. The place was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had solar power, a well, and most importantly, it was invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. He carried Elias inside on the second day after they'd left the hospital. The boy's jaw was wired shut, and he'd lost 15 pounds in a week. But his eyes were alert, and he could move without help. "This is where we'll stay for a while," Coulter said, setting his son on the single bed. Elias wrote on a notepad. "How long?" "Until it's safe." "When will that be?" Coulter looked out the cabin's single window at the endless trees. "Soon." That evening, after Elias had fallen asleep, Coulter went to his truck and retrieved a metal case from behind the spare tire. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were items he'd hoped never to see again. A Sig Sauer P226, night vision goggles, a tactical knife with a 7-inch blade, other tools from another life. He cleaned each piece methodically, checking the action, testing the weight. Muscle memory took over, and his hands moved with the efficiency of a machine designed for one purpose. The next morning, he drove to Missoula and made several stops. A hunting supply store for ammunition and basic camping gear, an electronics shop for surveillance equipment, a pharmacy where he used a fake ID to purchase medical supplies that weren't available over the counter. That on the way back to the cabin, he stopped at a pay phone and called Maya. "Jesus, Coulter, I've been trying to reach you for days," she said. "I heard about what happened to Elias. We're fine. Like hell you are. Where are you?" "Safe." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you get. I need a favor." Maya was quiet for a moment. "What kind of favor?" "Information. I need to know everything about Cade Fessler and his associates. Addresses, habits, weaknesses. Everything. Coulter dash. And I need it untraceable. No digital footprints, no records. You're talking about going off-grid. That's not you anymore. You have a son to think about. I am thinking about him. This won't bring him peace. It'll bring him safety." Another pause. "Give me 48 hours. The line went dead. Coulter drove back to the cabin and spent the rest of the day teaching Elias how to use the solar radio and the backup generator. Basic survival skills, in case something went wrong. That night, they sat on the cabin's small porch and watched the stars. Elias wrote questions on his notepad, and Coulter answered them as honestly as he could. About the military. About Afghanistan. About the kind of man he'd been before Elias was born. "Are you going to hurt them?" Elias wrote. Coulter considered lying, but his son deserved better than that. "Yes." "Good." The simple response surprised him. "Good." Elias wrote carefully, "They hurt me to hurt you. That makes them evil. Evil people don't stop until they're stopped." Coulter looked at his 15-year-old son and saw something he'd hoped never to see. The same cold understanding that had kept him alive in places where mercy was a luxury and hesitation meant death. "You're not wrong," he said finally. 2 days later, Maya called with information. Cade Fessler had an apartment in Portland and a girlfriend named Candy who worked at a strip club called Paradise. He ran methamphetamine for the Mongols, mostly small-time stuff, but he had ambitions. 3 months ago, he'd hooked up with Trista Vaughn, and since then his lifestyle had gotten more expensive. "He got backup," Maya said. "A guy named Louis Griggs. Ex-military, dishonorably discharged. They usually travel together." "What about Trista?" "Living with Fessler now. Word is she's been talking to lawyers about custody and inheritance rights. One of them thinks she might have a case. She doesn't. Maybe not legally. but she could tie you up in court for years. Make things complicated. Coulter thanked Maya and hung up. Complications were exactly what he couldn't afford. The next day, he drove to Portland alone, leaving Elias with enough supplies to last a week. The boy could take care of himself, and the cabin was invisible to anyone who didn't already know its location in Portland. Coulter rented a room at a cheap motel under a false name. He paid cash and avoided the security cameras in the parking lot. Old habits that he spent the afternoon driving past Fessler's apartment building, timing the traffic patterns and identifying escape routes. The building was 4 stories, no doorman, minimal security. Fessler lived on the 3rd floor, Unit 3B. That evening, Coulter watched Paradise from across the street. It was the kind of place that attracted men with more money than sense and women with more problems than options. Trista's car was in the parking lot at 11 o'clock. She emerged with Fessler and Griggs. The 3 of them climbed into Fessler's truck and drove to a diner on the other side of town. Coulter followed at a distance, staying 2 cars back. Inside the diner, they took a corner booth. Coulter sat at the counter where he could observe them in the mirror behind the coffee machine. Trista did most of the talking, gesturing with her hands like she was explaining something important. Fessler listened with the patience of a man who knew he was going to get paid. After an hour, they left. Coulter waited 5 minutes, then approached their waitress. "Excuse me, I think my friends left their phone." He showed her his own device. "Mind if I check their table?" "Sure, honey. Go ahead." Coulter walked to the booth and palmed the napkin Trista had been writing on. In the parking lot, he held it up to the streetlight. Phone numbers, meeting times, and an address he didn't recognize. The next morning, he drove to the strange address. It was a law office in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service. The sign read, "Brennan and Associates Family Law." Coulter parked where he could see the entrance and waited. At 2 o'clock, Trista arrived alone. She spent an hour inside, then came out carrying a manila envelope. That evening, Coulter called his own lawyer in Oregon. "Jim, it's Coulter Rains. I need you to expect some legal papers. Custody petition, probably. Maybe inheritance claims. What kind of papers? The kind that don't matter. Just handle them quietly. No media, no public records if you can help it. Coulter, if someone's challenging your custody, let them challenge. I'm not worried." He hung up and drove back to the cabin. On the way, he stopped at another pay phone and made one more call. "Deputy Greer, this is Coulter Rains. I wanted to let you know I'll be out of town for a while. Taking Elias somewhere safe while he heals. That's probably smart. Any word on who attacked him?" "Nothing yet, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. We're doing our best, Mr. Rains." "I know you are." When he reached the cabin, Elias was sitting on the porch reading a book. The boy looked up as his father approached. "How did it go?" He wrote, "They're making their move. Legal challenges, custody petitions. Trying to tie us up in court. Will it work?" "No, but it'll keep them distracted." Elias wrote something else, then showed it to his father. "When do we go home?" Coulter looked at the trees, the mountains, the endless sky. For a moment, he almost told his son the truth. That home was wherever they were together. That the ranch in Oregon was just a place, and places could be abandoned if necessary. Instead, he said, soon. Louis Griggs liked to drink alone at a bar called The Anchor every Tuesday night. He'd sit at the far end, nursing whiskey and watching sports on the television above the bottles. Maya's research had been thorough. Coulter watched from a booth near the back, sipping coffee and pretending to read a newspaper. Griggs was smaller than Fessler, but carried himself like a man who'd seen combat. His movements were economical, controlled. He kept his back to the wall and his eyes on the exits at T11:30. Griggs paid his tab and walked outside. Coulter waited 2 minutes, then followed. The parking lot was poorly lit, with deep shadows between the streetlights. Griggs was unlocking his motorcycle when Coulter approached from behind. Louis Griggs. The man spun around, his hand moving toward his jacket. Who's asking? Someone who wants to talk. About what? Coulter stepped into the light so Griggs could see his face. About what you did to my son. Recognition flickered in Griggs's eyes, followed immediately by calculation. He was outnumbered, but he had home field advantage. His hand stayed near his jacket. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. 15-year-old kid. Broken jaw. Ring any bells? Griggs shifted his weight, preparing to move. You got proof I was involved in anything? Don't need proof. Just need you. For what? To send a message. Griggs went for his gun then, a clean draw that would have worked against most opponents. But Coulter had been expecting it. He stepped inside the arc of the weapon and drove his elbow into Griggs's throat. The man went down hard, gasping for air. Coulter picked up the gun and ejected the magazine. Nothing personal, Louis. Just business. He dragged Griggs to his truck and zip-tied his hands behind his back. The man was conscious but couldn't speak with his crushed windpipe. They drove for an hour into the mountains, past the last cell tower, past the last chance for rescue. Coulter found a logging road that hadn't been used in years and followed it until the trees swallowed them completely. Here's what's going to happen, Coulter said, pulling Griggs from the truck. You're going to disappear. Your friends are going to wonder what happened to you. Maybe they'll think you ran. Maybe they'll think someone settled an old score. Doesn't matter what they think. Griggs tried to speak, but only managed to wheeze. The message is simple. Stay away from my family. Both of you. Because what happens to you is going to happen to them if they don't listen. Coulter showed Griggs the tactical knife. 7 inches of steel with an edge that could split hairs. It was over quickly. Later, much later, Coulter drove back to Portland and left Griggs's motorcycle in a parking garage downtown. He wiped down the surfaces, but left enough trace evidence to suggest the bike had been there for days. By morning, he was back at the cabin. Elias was still sleeping, his breathing deep and regular. The boy's face was healing, the swelling almost gone. Coulter made coffee and sat on the porch as the sun came up. In a few hours, someone would notice that Louis Griggs hadn't come home. They'd call the police, file a missing person report. The investigation would lead nowhere because there was nowhere for it to lead. Point one down. The law office of Brennan and Associates received an interesting visitor 3 days after Louis Griggs disappeared. Devine Raines arrived with a briefcase full of documents and a story about her father's being influenced by undue pressure. Coulter watched from the coffee shop across the street, using a telephoto lens to photograph everyone who entered or left the building. At 2:15, Devine emerged with a satisfied smile on her face. That evening, he followed her to a restaurant in downtown Portland. She met Trista at a corner table, and they talked for over an hour. Coulter couldn't hear the conversation, but their body language told the story. Devine was animated, confident. Trista listened with the intensity of someone who saw dollar signs in every word. When they left, Coulter was ready. He'd placed a GPS tracker under Devine's car while she was inside, and a listening device in her purse when she'd hung it on the back of her chair. Old habits from Afghanistan, where information was more valuable than ammunition. He followed Devine to her apartment, then parked where he could monitor the tracker on his phone. The listening device transmitted to a receiver he'd hidden in his jacket pocket. For the next week, he learned everything about Devine Raines. She was desperate for money, drowning in debt from a failed business venture. She'd been counting on inheriting half of Hal's estate, and the will had destroyed those plans, but she wasn't giving up. She'd hired Brennan to challenge the will on grounds of mental incompetence. The strategy was to prove that Hal had been manipulated by his estranged son, a dangerous military veteran with a history of violence. We need evidence, he heard her tell Brennan over the phone. Something that shows he's unstable, violent, a threat to his own son. That might be difficult to obtain legally, then obtain it illegally. On Thursday, Devine met with a private investigator at a truck stop outside the city. Coulter watched the exchange through binoculars, photographing the license plates and faces. The PI was a former cop named Reynolds who specialized in finding dirt on people who didn't want to be found. That night, Coulter called Maya. I need everything you can find on a PI named Reynolds. And I need to know about Devine Raines' finances. This is getting complicated, Coulter. It's about to get simple. Maya was quiet for a moment. The Griggs thing made the news. Police think it's drug-related. Probably right. Am I what? Are you all right? Because you sound different. Colder. Coulter looked out the cabin window at Elias, who was sketching by lamplight. The boy's jaw was almost healed, and he could eat solid food again. In a few days, the wires would come out. I'm fine. That's what I'm afraid of. Trista's car was found vandalized in the parking lot of Paradise 2 nights later. Someone had slashed all 4 tires, smashed the windows, and spray-painted "Leave Town" across the hood in red letters. She called the police, but they treated it like routine vandalism. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no evidence to suggest who might be responsible. Just another random crime in a city full of them. But Trista knew better. She called Cade as soon as the police left. "It's him," she said, her voice shaking with rage or fear or both. "That bastard is trying to scare me. Maybe you should be scared instead," Cade replied. That conversation was recorded by the listening device in Trista's purse, which Coulter had placed there during her meeting with Devine. He listened to it while sitting in his truck outside a gun store in Missoula, where he'd just purchased additional ammunition under a false ID. Cade was getting impatient. The legal approach was taking too long, and now his partner was missing. Time to apply direct pressure. But first, they needed to find Coulter and Elias. Reynolds, the PI, had been asking questions in Oregon, talking to neighbors, checking school records. So far, he'd learned that father and son had disappeared without telling anyone where they were going. "They could be anywhere," Reynolds reported during a phone call Coulter intercepted. "Guy's got military training. He knows how to vanish. Then make him reappear," Devine said. "He's got to surface eventually. What if he doesn't? Then we make him want to." That evening, Coulter received a call on the secure satellite phone Maya had given him. "They're planning something," she said without preamble. "My contacts in Portland say Fessler's been asking around about explosives." "What kind of explosives?" "Nothing fancy. Probably just pipe bombs or Molotov cocktails, but enough to make a point." Coulter felt the familiar coldness settle in his chest. The same feeling he'd had in Kandahar when the enemy stopped playing by rules and started targeting civilians. "Any idea what the target is?" "Your ranch. They figure if they can't find you, they'll give you a reason to come home." "How long do I have?" "Maybe a day, maybe less." After Maya hung up, Coulter sat in the cabin's main room and watched Elias draw. The boy was working on a portrait of the mountains, his hand steady despite the recent trauma. "We need to leave," Coulter said. Elias looked up. "Where?" "Somewhere safe. Safer than here." Coulter thought about pipe bombs and Molotov cocktails. About desperate people making desperate choices. About the difference between hunters and prey. There is no safe. Not anymore. They packed in silence, taking only what they could carry easily. Coulter loaded his weapons into the truck's hidden compartment and made sure the satellite phone was fully charged. Before they left, he sent Maya a text. "It's time." Her reply came immediately. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Then God help them all." Devine Raines lived in a converted warehouse apartment in Portland's Pearl District. Expensive, trendy, and isolated. Perfect for someone who didn't want neighbors asking questions about late-night visitors or unusual sounds. Coulter had been watching the building for 3 days, timing her routines, mapping her security measures. She was careful but not paranoid. She checked her locks, but didn't vary her schedule. She owned a gun but kept it in a bedside drawer instead of carrying it. Amateur mistakes that would get her killed. On Thursday night, she went to dinner with friends at a restaurant 6 blocks away. Coulter waited until she ordered her second glass of wine, then slipped into her building through the service entrance. The lock was electronic, but Maya had provided him with a device that could crack most commercial systems. That Devine's apartment was on the 4th floor. Hardwood floors, exposed brick walls, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. The refrigerator was full of organic food and imported wine. Coulter found what he was looking for in her home office. Financial records showing debts of over $200,000. Correspondence with lawyers, private investigators, and other people who specialized in making problems disappear, and photos. Dozens of them taken with a telephoto lens. Pictures of Elias at school, at home, walking to the bus stop. Pictures of Coulter at the grocery store, the bank, the hospital. They'd been hunting his son. Coulter pocketed the photos and went to work. He needed something that would look natural, accidental. Something that wouldn't trigger a murder investigation. In Devine's medicine cabinet, he found prescription bottles for anxiety and insomnia. The labels showed recent refills, large quantities. Combined with alcohol, the drugs would be lethal in the right dosage. He ground 30 pills into powder and mixed them into an expensive bottle of vodka, then placed it back in the freezer where she kept it. The taste would be masked by the alcohol's burn, and the effect would be delayed long enough for him to be far away. Devine returned home at 11:30, slightly drunk and completely unaware that her apartment had been compromised. Coulter watched from the building across the street as lights came on in her windows. Midnight. She poured herself a drink from the doctored bottle. T12:15. She poured another WY 1 o'clock. She was unconscious on her living room floor. By 3, her heart had stopped beating. The medical examiner would find alcohol and prescription drugs in her system. The investigation would conclude that Devine Rains had committed suicide, driven to despair by financial troubles and family disputes. Case closed. Coulter drove back to the new safe house he'd established in the mountains east of Portland. It was smaller than the Montana cabin, but just as isolated, with clear sight lines in all directions and multiple escape routes. Elias was waiting on the porch, sketching by lamplight. "How did it go?" the boy asked. "It went. Is she dead?" The question was asked with the same tone Elias might use to ask about the weather. Clinical. Detached. Coulter recognized the tone because he'd heard it in his own voice many times over the years. "Yes. Good. She was going to hurt us." Coulter sat down beside his son and looked at the drawing. It showed a mountain landscape, but the shadows were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like something was hiding in them. "How do you know that?" "I saw the picture she had. Of me at school, of us at the ranch. She was hunting us like animals." "That's over now." Elias set down his pencil. "What about the others? What about them? Are you going to kill them too?" The question hung in the air between them. Coulter looked at his 15-year-old son and saw a reflection of himself. Someone who understood that the world was divided into predators and prey, and that mercy was a luxury that got you killed. "If I have to, you have to." Cade Fessler received the anonymous text message at 2 in the morning. "Your friend Devine won't be helping anymore. Want to discuss terms? Warehouse District, Pier 47, tomorrow 11 p.m. Come alone." He showed the message to Trista over breakfast at their apartment. "It's a trap," she said immediately. "Obviously. Question is, whose trap? Has to be Coulter. Nobody else knows about Devine." Cade stirred his coffee, thinking. With Louis missing and Devine dead, his leverage was disappearing fast. The inheritance scam had seemed like easy money, but it was turning into a war. "Maybe we should cut our losses," Trista said. "Leave town, find another score. $70 million, babe. That's not a score you walk away from. It is if you're dead." Cade looked at her across the table. For months ago, she'd been an easy mark, a desperate junkie with a rich ex-husband and a sob story about her kid. Now she was talking about running. The smell of fear was all over her. "I'm not running from some washed-up soldier. He killed Devine, and Louis's been missing for a week. You don't know he killed anyone." "Then where are they?" Cade didn't have an answer for that, but he had connections, resources, backup plans. Coulter Rains might be dangerous, but he was still just one man. That evening, Cade made several phone calls. By 10 o'clock, he had 5 armed men positioned around Pier 47. Mongols prospects, hungry for a chance to prove themselves. If Coulter showed up, he'd walk into a crossfire. Cade arrived at the pier at 10:45, carrying a sawed-off shotgun under his jacket. The warehouse district was dark and quiet, full of shadows and blind corners. Perfect for an ambush. At T11 exactly, a figure emerged from behind a shipping container 50 yards away. Male, average height, wearing dark clothes. Too far away to identify, but had to be Coulter. "You wanted to talk?" the figure called out. "I want my money," Cade replied. $70 million, split 4 ways. That was the deal. Deals changed. Devine's dead. Your friend Louis's dead. Now it's just you and the junkie. Prove it. The figure tossed something across the distance. It landed at Cade's feet. Louis's wallet, complete with ID and credit cards. Convinced, Cade felt a chill run down his spine. If Louis was really dead, then this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival. "What do you want?" "I want you to disappear. Both of you. Tonight. Forever. And if we don't, then you end up like your friends." Cade signaled to his backup team, then drew his shotgun. Here's a counteroffer. You give me the money, and I let you live long enough to watch me break your kid's other leg. The shooting started immediately. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as 5 weapons opened fire on the figure behind the shipping container. But when the smoke cleared, there was nobody there. Where the hell did he go? One of the prospects shouted. That's when Cade realized he'd made a mistake. The figure hadn't been Coulter at all. It had been a decoy, a distraction. While his men were focused on the container, the real threat was coming from somewhere else. The first prospect went down silently, taken from behind with a blade across the throat. The second disappeared into the shadows between 2 warehouses. The third started shooting at phantoms, wasting ammunition on empty air. Cade ran for his motorcycle, but the tires had been slashed. He tried his phone, but there was no signal. Someone was jamming the cell towers. When the shooting stopped, Cade was alone on the pier with 4 dead men and the growing certainty that he'd been outplayed from the beginning. Coulter emerged from the shadows like a ghost materializing from smoke. Your boys weren't very good, he said conversationally. Cade raised a shotgun, but Coulter was faster. The tactical knife took him in the chest, angled upward toward the heart. He fell backward onto the wooden planks, his blood mixing with salt water and motor oil. This is for my son, Coulter said, and twisted the blade. Later, much later, Cade Fessler's body was loaded into the back of a pickup truck and driven to an abandoned grain silo 40 miles outside Portland. The structure had been empty for years, forgotten by everyone except the rats and the wind. BY morning. There was nothing left to find. Trista waited in the apartment until dawn, smoking cigarettes and pacing the floor like a caged animal. When Cade didn't come home, she knew he was dead. Just like Devine, just like Louis, she packed everything she could carry into 2 suitcases and loaded them into her car. Whatever was happening, she wanted no part of it. $70 million wasn't worth dying for. The highway stretched ahead of her, empty and dark. She'd drive to California, maybe Mexico, somewhere far enough away that Coulter Raines would never find her. But 20 miles outside Portland, her car broke down. Steam poured from under the hood, and the engine made sounds like a dying animal. She coasted to the shoulder and tried to restart it, but nothing happened. Her cell phone had no signal. The highway was deserted, and in the distance, she could see a pair of headlights approaching. The truck pulled over behind her car. A man got out and walked toward her, silhouetted against his own headlights. For a moment, she thought it might be a good Samaritan, someone willing to help a stranded motorist. Then she recognized the walk, the posture, the deliberate, measured pace of a predator approaching wounded prey. Car trouble? Coulter asked. Trista's hand moved toward the gun in her purse, but she knew it was too late. He'd planned this, orchestrated it, led her exactly where he wanted her to be. You can't kill me, she said. I'm Elias's mother. No, you're the woman who abandoned him. There's a difference. People will ask questions. I have friends, family. You have nobody. I checked. The gun in her purse felt heavy and useless. Even if she could draw it, even if she could fire it, she knew it wouldn't matter. This man had killed trained soldiers in foreign wars. What was one desperate junkie on an empty highway? Please, she whispered. You broke into my home. You hurt my child. You threatened my family. His voice was calm, conversational. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? I can disappear. You'll never see me again. I know. The last thing Trista saw was the blade of the tactical knife catching the moonlight. The last thing she heard was the wind through the trees beside the highway. Hours later, an RV parked at a rest stop 20 miles away caught fire. The explosion could be seen for miles, and by the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left but twisted metal and ash. The investigation would conclude that a propane leak had caused the blast. The VIN numbers on the RV traced back to a vehicle that had been reported stolen 6 months earlier. No bodies were found, but forensic analysis suggested that at least one person had been inside when the fire started. Another tragic accident on America's highways. Deputy Sheriff Lonnie Greer received an anonymous tip 3 days after the RV explosion. Someone had left a manila envelope in his patrol car while he was having coffee at Murphy's Diner. Inside were photographs, documents, and a typed note explaining everything. The photos showed Devine Rain's meeting with known criminals. The documents proved she'd been planning to falsify evidence in a will contest. The note laid out a conspiracy to extort money from a wealthy inheritance, involving fraud, assault, and attempted kidnapping. According to this, Greer told his partner, the whole thing was a scam. Devine Rains was working with these other people to steal Coulter Rains's inheritance. What happened to them? Looks like they turned on each other. Drug deal gone bad, maybe. You know how these things go. The investigation was officially closed within a week. Devine Rains had died of an accidental overdose, driven to despair by financial troubles. Kate Fessler and Trista Vaughn had disappeared, probably fleeing to avoid prosecution for their crimes. Louis Griggs was still missing, but men like him vanished all the time. Case closed. Meanwhile, Maya Torres made several phone calls from her office in Portland. She deleted digital records, altered electronic files, and made sure that certain surveillance footage from certain locations was accidentally corrupted. When she was finished, there was no evidence that Coulter Rains had been anywhere near Portland during the relevant time periods. No hotel records, no credit card transactions, no electronic footprints of any kind. As far as the official record was concerned, he'd been in Montana the entire time, caring for his injured son. It's done, she told him during their final conversation. But this is at Coulter. I can't help you again. You won't need to. I hope you're right. For Elias's sake. He's safe now. That's all that matters. Maya was quiet for a moment. Was it worth it? Coulter looked out the cabin window at his son, who was sketching in the afternoon light. The boy's jaw had healed completely, and he was smiling again, drawing pictures of mountains and trees instead of shadows and hidden things. Ask me in 20 years. The therapist's office in Missoula was warm and comfortable, with soft chairs and paintings of peaceful landscapes on the walls. Dr. Sarah Mitchell specialized in treating trauma victims, particularly children who'd experienced violence. How are you sleeping? She asked Elias during their third session. Better. I don't have the dreams as much. What kind of dreams? About them coming back. About them hurting Dad while I watch. Dr. Mitchell made a note in her file. Do you feel safe now? Yes. Why? Elias considered the question carefully. Because Dad won't let anyone hurt me again. How do you know that? Because he promised. And Dad keeps his promises. The sessions continued for 6 weeks. Gradually, Elias began to talk about other things. School, art, the ranch in Oregon. Normal teenage concerns instead of survival fears. Doctor Mitchell was impressed by his progress. Most victims of violent crime took months or years to recover their equilibrium. Elias seemed to be healing with remarkable speed. He's resilient, she told Coulter after one session. Stronger than most adults I've treated. He gets that from his mother, not from you. Coulter smiled without humor. His mother was the strong one. I'm just the one who survived. On their last day in Montana, Coulter and Elias hiked to the top of a mountain overlooking the valley. The view stretched for 50 miles in every direction. Endless forests, crystal lakes, peaks that scraped the sky. Are you ready to go home? Coulter asked. Yeah, I miss the ranch. No more nightmares. No, they're gone. Coulter studied his son's face. The physical wounds had healed completely, but there were other changes. A hardness around the eyes. A way of watching doorways and shadows. The boy had learned lessons that no 15-year-old should have to learn. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I'm not. Why not? Elias picked up a stone and threw it over the cliff. They watched it fall until it disappeared into the trees below. Because now I know what you're capable of. And I know you'll always protect me. Always, even if it means doing bad things. Especially then. They hiked back down the mountain in comfortable silence. That evening, they loaded their belongings into the truck and prepared for the long drive back to Oregon. The ranch looked exactly the same as when they'd left it. Green hills, red barn, cattle grazing in the distance. But Coulter approached it differently now, scanning for threats, checking sight lines, making sure they were truly alone. The house had been cleaned and repaired. Maya had arranged for contractors to fix the damage from the break-in and install additional security measures. Motion sensors, reinforced doors, bullet-resistant windows. The place looked peaceful, but it was ready for war. Feels good to be home, Elias said, carrying his art supplies up to his room. Coulter walked through the house methodically, checking every room, every closet, every potential hiding place. Old habits. When he was satisfied that they were safe, he made coffee and sat on the front porch. His phone rang. Deputy Sheriff Lonnie Greer's number. Mr. Rains? Welcome back. Hope your son is feeling better. Much better. Thank you. Good to hear. I wanted to let you know we wrapped up the investigation into the break-in. Turns out it was part of a larger criminal conspiracy. The people responsible won't be bothering you again. I appreciate your thoroughness. Just doing my job. Looks like all the trouble has passed, though. Your family should be safe now. After Greer hung up, Coulter sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. In the distance, he could see the lights of town beginning to twinkle on. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the predators that moved in the shadows around them. Elias joined him on the porch, carrying a fresh sketchbook. What are you drawing now? Coulter asked. Plans. What kind of plans? For the veteran center you mentioned. The retreat where soldiers can come to heal. Coulter looked at the sketches. His son had designed a compound with multiple buildings, clear sight lines, and natural defensive positions. It looked like a place where damaged warriors could find peace without letting down their guard. When do we start building? Elias asked. Soon. I want to make sure everything's quiet first. It will be. The bad people are gone. How do you know? Elias smiled. And for a moment, he looked like the innocent child he'd been before the world taught him hard lessons about survival and justice. Because you made them gone, and you don't leave jobs half-finished. They sat together as darkness fell, father and son, survivors of a war that had never made the evening news. In the distance, an owl called from the trees. A peaceful sound in a peaceful place, but Coulter kept his gun within easy reach. Some habits never died.